Good afternoon and welcome to Legacy After the Locker Room. I'm your host, Kayla Bradham, here today with NFL six-year veteran, Mr. Rob Carpenter. Good afternoon, Rob.
How you doing, Kayla?
I'm doing great. Good to see you, my friend.
Mm.
Listen, let's go. We have so much to talk about because you're working hard to create equity through sports and to really create hope and possibility. I love the work you're doing. Before we talk about that, Rob, let's talk about your experience getting into the NFL. What did football look for you as a child?
It was a little weird when I was a kid. I actually I loved playing football, but for the most part, I didn't really get into organized football until I was in like the fifth grade. And most kids had already been playing in my neighborhood earlier than that, so I was just around playing, touch with the kids. And a friend of my brother's, who was a little older than I was, told me, he's like, "Look, you need to play," because I would be running around in the street playing with all the older kids. Here I am, a kid in elementary school, and I'm playing against kids in junior high school and in high school. He's like, "You're good. You need to play." And so, I went to my dad and was like, "All right." Two of my friends who lived up the street were playing organized little league football, and I was like, "I want to get on a team with them." And he was like, "All right, you sure?" He said, "Yeah." And that got me into it, and that got my start. And from that point, it just took off.
All right. And know that you graduated from Syracuse. Big announcement. I got the okay from my son, who knows that that's your alma mater, to let all of our, for the first time being announced, headed to Syracuse this fall. Rob, did you go on? I'm assuming you went on scholarship. Is that your story?
Yes, that also was a little weird thing as well. I didn't initially go to Syracuse. I went to Notre Dame as a freshman. Syracuse was on my list, but my dad and my grandfather were huge Notre Dame fans. They were both super excited when the first letters started coming in from Notre Dame. First recruiting letters started coming in from Notre Dame, and I was pretty high on the recruiting list when Lou Holtz took over the job the year before. So it was one of those things where I had a number of big schools, and I cut my list down pretty early so I wouldn't have to go through the grind of through the recruiting season, because I was also a very big basketball player, and the whole recruiting season goes through basketball season. I didn't want to miss a whole lot in my senior year of basketball, because it still was in the back of my mind that I actually wanted to play college basketball. But when it came down to it, I only took really three recruiting visits. I went to Notre Dame, I went to Penn State, and I went to University of Virginia. And Syracuse was still there, and it was always in the back of my mind. And after my freshman year at Notre Dame, I didn't really feel really comfortable there. It's just something was off, and Syracuse was right back on the line. And I'm like, you know what? This is a team that I actually would watch the replay of their games every Sunday with my dad. So I knew all about the program. I knew, everyone who was around, the local kids who were up there. Some of my peers were up there already. Guys that I even played basketball against in high school were up there playing football. So there was a lot of Long Island familiarity up there at Syracuse. So I felt really comfortable there. Even some of my high school classmates were there already. So that was a no-brainer once I decided to transfer.
I got to ask you, Rob, what is your advice to high school students who kind of have, narrowed down 3 or 4 schools to attend? What's your advice to them? What's the best way to narrow it down?
Um, think about what you actually want to do besides sports. Look at the programs that they actually have, and make sure that they're on your list of something that you want to do, and take the visits. It's important to take the visits to actually see the school and see the students, see the coaching staff, the faculty that's actually there that you're actually going to be interacting with, on a regular basis. Because I think that's really important. If you just think, the kids that are actually being recruited, and if they have, say, 4 or more schools that they have on that they have on their list, they need to make sure they're going to be comfortable where they are, because it's basically going to be your life for the next 4 or 5 years, and you're going to make a lot of acquaintances, and whatever you do at that school is basically going to be your program for the rest of your life. So just make sure that you take the visits, and feel comfortable where you are, so that you know that the choice that you're making is the right one for yourself.
That's great advice. Thank you so much. All right, so graduated from Syracuse on to the NFL. Tell us your story.
It was a weird night on draft night, honestly. I was touted to be, drafted in the first and third round, and I knew it wasn't going to work out that way in the first round. Just something was weird, something was off. The draft was a little different back then. It wasn't just the first round on the opening night of the draft. It went until basically the NFL said, "All right, we're tired," and however many rounds they got through that night is where they picked up the next day. And I actually didn't even get the call until maybe 9:30 that night. They were in the fourth round, and it was Cincinnati, who I really had no idea that I was actually even on the radar with them. I met with one of their scouts. That's it. All the other teams that actually had come to me 3 or 4 times. I figured it would be Seattle, maybe the Giants that were there, because those guys are actually calling me. They sent scouts, they sent coaches, and I actually even thought it might have been Cleveland, because that's when Bill Belichick was there. He came to the school a couple of times, and I sat down and met with him. But, out of the blue, it was Cincinnati, and it was weird that Sam Weiss was on the phone with it. And I was like, "Coach Weiss?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "You ready?" I said, "Yeah, of course, I'm ready." But again, it was pretty late at night when it happened. Actually, it might even been later than 9:30 now I think about it. It was pretty late, because I think I was dozing off when it happened. But from that point on, I actually just had it set in my head. All right, you got to do the best you can do to get ready for this upcoming season. Know it's going to be a little difficult, going to a whole different scenario. Not one of the top draft choices, so you got to fight your way to actually make this team and stay in the league for as long as you want it. My goal was 6 to 10 years in the NFL. I got to that level of 6 with being injured, actually having to end my career, but I did make it to that goal of 6. So I'm okay with what I did in the NFL.
Well, and what you did in the NFL was pretty amazing. You had with the Jets a crazy first game, right? Is that your highlight? Is that your highlight game in your career?
I wouldn't say that's my highlight game, but that's the best game I could think about as far as having to come to a team that I was a fan of, first of all, as a kid, and playing for basically my home team. I was literally, playing in my backyard. My grandmother was right there, Hofstra in Hempstead, where Hofstra University was, where I practiced every day. And I grew up 10 minutes away from the facility. So um, playing in that game was a little weird, because we were playing in Atlanta, and that was the first regular season game of the Georgia Dome. They had just opened the Georgia Dome, so it was a first for me in a Jets uniform, and it was a first for a game in that stadium. And that was the best game I had in my career as a Jet. But moving on from that, when I went to Philadelphia, the best game, I had a few good games in Philadelphia, and playing in my first playoff game was probably the highlight of my career when I was in Philadelphia. But that first game as a Jet, that stands out, right there at the top of the list.
I love it. I'm going to take just a moment, remind our listeners, this is the Legacy After the Locker Room podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Bradham, here today with NFL alumni Rob Carpenter. So, Rob, 6 years, wide receiver, knee injury. I'm sure by 6 years, we know the average career lasts 3. You had to have, taken some bruises and some hits and pretty beat up. Were you ready to be done at 6?
I actually was. I was married at the time, and I had told myself at that time, I was like, "Listen," I said, "I think I maybe have 1, maybe 2 more years left in my body," because it started getting harder and harder. Once the season would be over, and again, things were a little different back then. Once the season was over, you maybe took a month off, and you got right back into training. We had mini camps every month. It's different now with the OTAs and the way the off season works with the NFL now, but we basically were there in training almost year round. And once the season was over, those first 4 years, going into year 5 and going into year 6, I'm like, wow, it's getting harder and harder to actually, recoup after the season and get back on the training schedule and make sure that you're ready to go for training camp. And at that time, I was just like, you know what, the injuries starting to pile up. And basically my whole time in college, the only thing I basically had was an ankle injury. And, I was used to ankle injuries from playing basketball. You roll your ankle, you tape it up, and you go back out and you play. I had a pretty severe one in college. I didn't miss any time, but it took me about a month to actually get back. I had a high ankle sprain my last year at Syracuse, but it took me about a month to get back to being, in form. But once again, being in the NFL, once the off season comes around, it gets tough to actually get back up, get into your training program, make sure you're actually on the program every day, staying in shape. So when at that time our mini camps came around, you're ready to go. You don't suffer any, fluke injuries, and you go back and continue your training all the way till training camp starts. And training camp for us was 6 weeks. It wasn't like a month now, where and it was double sessions in pads. It was a whole different ball game back then. So you had to be ready to go. You had to be physically ready to go. You had to be mentally ready to go, because it's a grind when you're going to be in training camp. 6 weeks of double sessions of pads is tough. So yeah, when you think about when the season is over at the end of January, and you're like, okay, I have until June, and then you say, you know what, June is going to be here almost tomorrow. So trying to get ready that fast is, it just caught up with me. I'm just like, all right, I don't know how much longer I could be able to do this, but at the end of that 6th year, I'm like, you know what? Once I did my rehab for my knee and everything, I'm like, you know what? I'm not even going to attempt to come back, because I'm just done. I couldn't even think about doing it anymore. I had to go into that next phase.
So I want to talk about that next phase, Rob. But before I do, I'm curious, if you didn't play in the NFL, what was your career aspiration?
I actually wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah, all right.
I was studying sociology at Syracuse. So my last year, I was actually an assistant in one of the elementary schools that was actually right there on the campus, and right basically where we lived as athletes. It was literally right there. There was an elementary school. I could walk from my apartment just right up the block and assist in the school. So that's actually what I was trending towards if I wasn't going to be an NFL player. And hopefully at one point in time, I would have liked to have been a principal of a school. So that was my goal. That was what I was looking for if I didn't make it to the NFL.
Well, I didn't know the answer to that, but it turned out to be a great segue, because the project that you're working on now is all about the youth. Right. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing and what you're planning.
Well, it came about from actually two of my former Syracuse teammates. One of them, Gary McCummings, he actually came to me with the idea that we needed to get together and form this group and try to help out a lot of the youth in the inner cities with sports. We know that sports is a gateway to a lot in the inner cities. And being up here in the New York, New Jersey area, and me being from New York, and we got together with another one of our former teammates, Dwayne Kinnan, who actually has a great program running in Brooklyn, New York. He's transformed a lot of the parks in Brooklyn. He's transformed some of the rec centers. He's added to the sports program at his high school. So we figured that if we could get together with him and utilize also Gary's sister, who was actually was the director of the program that we actually wanted to use to get this up and running, we could help out a lot, because we know what it's like to come through the inner cities. But also there was another aspect of it. Gary has daughters who actually came through the program where he's down in Raleigh, North Carolina. And he's like, we need to gear this towards the girls, because the girls are, they don't have a lot to look forward to in the inner cities when it comes to sports. And again, we know that sports is a gateway to a lot of other things. We could see it now if you follow what's going on with the WNBA. Those ladies are basically transforming everything that has to do with sports. And we know that young girls, especially girls of color, don't have a lot to look forward and look up to when it comes to sports. And there's a few out there that they can look up to. They see Serena, they see women like that, and they can say, you know what, we can strive to be like her. But the sports that are there for them don't allow that to happen. So we know girls volleyball, they can get into that. There's a lot of volleyball that's being played around this country that a lot of young girls don't even know is happening. Softball, we can have the girls actually get into that. And like I said, Dwayne with his group has transformed a lot of the softball fields in Brooklyn. Of course, basketball. And me personally, since I love basketball, that was right up my alley. I'm like, I'm all for it. We can make this happen. And we were hoping that through the program itself, we would just branch out to some other areas. We know that in the inner cities, a lot of young ladies like to dance. So we can add that to the aspect of the group at another time, but we know it will be coming. So unfortunately, we were ready to go and had pretty much everything in place, ready to go right when COVID hit, and it shut us down. But we're pretty much staying on top of things, and hopefully, this year, this fall, we can start the program all over again and get it running. And we know we had the numbers there for the participation, especially when we were going to be starting. We were going to start with volleyball, especially since Gary had the knowledge of that. He coached his daughters all through the program, and we just feel that it's a great gateway for these young ladies to have something to do. Parents wouldn't have to worry about the kids because it was basically going to be almost like an after school program. We had safe ways for these kids to go because some of the inner cities are rough, and we know that. Dwayne with his group had it set where there were going to be safe streets for these kids to come out of school, come to the rec centers, come to the gyms where parents didn't have to worry about them, and they know where they would be. They know they would be taken care of all the way up until the program ended for the night, and they could get home safe. So we weren't too worried about that, and we're just trying to make sure that the parents knew that this was going to be a good program for them to be in.
Rob, and I don't think it's lost on our listeners, but let's talk about some of the real issues. I grew up in a single parent home. I'm a single parent living in Milwaukee. We have things like access to transportation that can be a problem, access to the money for the uniforms, the equipment, access to resources, buildings. There aren't fitness centers in the inner cities. What you're doing really creates hope and possibility through sports in ways that middle and upper class families aren't even aware of the struggles, right? It's just not a big deal to drop $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a year on hockey for your kid, where coming up with tennis shoes to play basketball can be. And in fact, just truthfully, one of my good friends, her son was shot at a bus station because he had Jordans on. He was shot and killed for his shoes. Yeah. So we have real issues, and you're working hard to solve some of those. If people want to support what you're doing, what can they do to help?
Well, once we back up again, I will have a lot of that stuff on my Instagram, and I'll make sure everybody has that info for Dwayne's Instagram too, because he puts a lot of that stuff along with his group. He ties it in to what's going on. But up to us sports is the organization. That's basically that we're going to be running it under. And again, my former teammate Gary Cummins, his sister. Ahada is the director of the program, so it's there with Dwayne. We had the funding to get it done because his group actually goes out and tries to get a lot of grants. That's actually how he transformed a lot in Brooklyn. And going back to what you said about the access for the kids, and for me. And for Dwayne, we know about the access or the lack of access in the inner cities because basically when you're growing up around New York City, the kids aren't in cars. It's public transportation. You have to take public transportation pretty much everywhere, whether it's the bus or the subway. And you have kids going from Brooklyn to Manhattan to the Bronx, and they're by themselves. We know that, and parents know that. And when you're a single parent, trying to raise your child in Brooklyn or Queens or Manhattan, the Bronx, it's tough. And because most of the time throughout the day, you don't know where your kid is, and when they're on the subway, it's not always the safest place, especially when your kid has to travel at night. And most of the programs are going to be taken on and after school, and they take place at night, games take place at night, and unfortunately, a lot of parents can't get there. So they have to feel comfortable enough to know that when their daughters or their sons are in these programs, that they can get to where they need to be, and then get home from where they are safely. So we're trying to make sure that takes place. And as you said, your friend's son shop for his sneakers. We know all about that. I know all about that. Growing up in the age that I grew up, Gary the same, Dwayne the same. It was pretty rough for us growing up in the '80s. We're teenagers in the '80s, and especially in New York, that's the era. That's the crack era. And danger was around every corner. We knew it, but we tried our best to avoid it. And the one thing that we knew how to avoid it was playing sports. Playing sports kept us away from the streets, especially me. I could attest to that in a big way. A lot of the friends that I had when I was growing up, the streets caught them. And I was lucky enough to say at an early enough age, you know what, I'm not going that route. I'm going to stay over here. I'm going to stay in the court. I'm going to stay in the field. And, that kept me away from a lot of the trouble that a lot of my friends got into. And even some of them are not here to this day. They died at an early age. So, because of the dangers of what goes on outside. But hopefully, come this fall, we can get back into a safe enough routine, and we can get this program underway and help out a lot of kids.
I love it. For anybody who's listening to the podcast and not watching the live stream, you can follow Rob Carpenter on Instagram. It's rcarp81. Again, that's RCARP 81. And again, Rob, that's Up to Us Sports. People can Google that, get more information. Besides COVID, what challenges are you guys having getting this program up and running? Is there anything that our listeners can do to help?
Actually, before COVID hit, we actually had a lot of participation. Everything was there. That was the good thing, and we were so anxious to get underway, because we knew that once we got started, the program would just expand, and that's what we were looking for. It was great. Everybody was super optimistic about what was going on, the participation that was there from the kids, all the kids that had registered to join, the parents that were comfortable about everything that was going on, the facilities that were there. It was just a lot of optimism abound, and then all of a sudden everything just stopped. So, and I'm pretty sure that everyone that you have come across that basically works with camps, charities, and stuff like that, it's hit them. It hit everybody. So the thing is going to actually be to get up and running again. It's just going to be the participation. We think it's going to be there, especially since the kids that were registered early. We believe they will come back, along with a lot of the other kids that are around the city that like the direction that we're going in. So we weren't too hampered with the funding, because again, Dwayne Kenny, my former team, with his Dwayne Kenny group, he basically reached out to a lot of people, and he has his connections. We weren't all just into football. He was huge into baseball. Even though we played college football together, Dwayne was a huge baseball guy. And he's reached out to some of his contacts in the MLB, and he's gotten grants from them to help out a lot of stuff that he's done. So it helped us all out. We each had our little segment that we were doing. Gary was the guy who actually got us together. Dwayne, we use his resources with the group itself. Gary's sister being the director of Up to Us Sports, and I was coming on as a coach. I was just looking forward to actually getting in, being in the gyms with these kids. Me personally myself, having to learn other sports like Gary did. Like I said, Gary took it from his girls being in the program and him having to learn actually all about volleyball, and he's actually taken them to a couple of AAU national titles, which is awesome. So, he's like, you can do it, man. He's like, I know you in basketball. He's like, because up at Syracuse, that's all we did. And in our spare time, I was on the basketball court with the basketball players. That was my passion, along with football. So, he's like, I know you can coach basketball. He's like, but these other sports, man, he's like, and you and Dwayne and baseball as well. So we know it can happen, and we look forward to doing it.
Well, and one of the things that intrigues me is The program starts in Raleigh. You're bringing it up to New York. This is a program that's replicable, right? Like you can
Yes.
plant this all over the United States, and a lot of large cities, quite frankly, need something like this. If we're honest, the Boys and Girls Clubs are no longer enough. I know they're working so
Right.
hard, but we need more. We're bursting out of the seams with kids who have a desire to change the world, and we don't have enough resources to help them.
If you actually look on the if you Googled up to a sports, you can see that there are some known faces that are with it, and it's nationwide. There's a couple of professional athletes that are in the program, whether they're as directors or coaches. So it helps out a lot to have faces that are known, especially when you want a program that you want to go nationwide, that you know can help everywhere around this country, because everywhere every state has an inner city, and we know that kids actually need the help, can use the help, and want it. There's not a city that you can go into in this country where you can have an open gym and roll out a basketball and kids will just come in and play. They don't care who's in there. Kids will just come in and play. You can roll out some soccer balls onto a field and kids will just go out and play. They don't care who's there. So we know that these programs can work. They're there. And we just hopefully, the next few years, this goes to a level that is out there to help every city.
Well, Rob, and I think even beyond that, you can throw some balls out on a field and kids will go play.
Right.
But when men or women who have had a professional career are out there with them, using your name to create good, to create hope. Rob Carpenter is going to be at this event. That is going to draw entire families out, right? And again, we talk about parents aren't always involved with what their kids are doing, but mom or dad watched Rob Carpenter play football. Oh, I loved him. Yeah, I'll take you. Maybe we can get a picture. Maybe we can get an autograph. Now we have families outside together.
Right.
And you with a story like I didn't get involved on the streets because of sports, inspiring young people to make good choices and really encouraging the girls to play sports. And honestly, Rob, I think that's so huge. And you're right. WNBA is doing a lot to make a difference and to really inspire that. But you're specifically targeting girls in sports. Is that right?
Yes.
How are you guys doing that?
It's in the schools, and again, we're grateful that Dwayne is the guy who's there, who is on the ground. He's been on the ground in Brooklyn for a while. He has a lot of contacts around the city. So it's great that he's there and he wanted to do it, because his background is basically running Boys and Girls Clubs. That once he left Syracuse, he stayed up in Syracuse for a while. He was running the Boys and Girls Club. He knew, he's like, you know what, I could do this at home, and I could do it in a different way and help out everyone in that community. And Gary with the passion for helping out girls sports, and me myself being in sports in general. I just love sports in general. I'll watch sports all day long. I'll go out and help out with sports all day long. So it's a no-brainer for all of us, to be there and to do it. And we know that the girls, again, don't have all the access that the boys do. So with what's going on in the country today, we know that we can help if we get a lot more girls into sports, and that keeps girls on the right track, and it helps out in the long run. We know that.
Speaking of watching sports all day, shameless plug. Thank you for having the Bucks game on in the background.
I figured you'd say that.
you know I'm watching that, right? It looks
Yes.
like I'm looking at you. I'm watching. So thank you. And also, speaking of making a difference in the community, I ask every guest on Legacy After the Locker Room to partner with me on behalf of Sports Philanthropy Network to make an autograph donation to Special Olympics. Rob, you willing to help us out?
Oh, absolutely. I'll actually send something over. I have a couple of my collector's helmets in my case downstairs. So a couple of them are signed by myself and some former teammates. So I'll get one over to you.
That is so awesome. Thank you so much. I want to give you the last 30 seconds or so, Rob, parting words of wisdom from the NFL alumni. Man, Rob Carpenter.
Well, my words of wisdom are always never take a day off. You can actually get things done, and never take a day short. So you can't be saying to yourself that there's always tomorrow. There's always tomorrow. We aren't guaranteed tomorrow. So if you're doing everything that you need to do today, that's something you can actually pat yourself on the back for.
Great piece of advice, Rob. My name is Kayla Bradham, here today with NFL alumni, Rob Carpenter, Up to Us Sports. Again, follow Rob on Instagram at rcarp81. Rob and I here to remind you to live your legacy. Thanks, Rob.
No problem, Kayla.